Kitco News special coverage of Freedom Fest is brought to you by I Trust Capital.
You're watching Kitco News. I'm Michelle Makori, and we are coming to you from Freedom Fest, where the state of the U.S. economy has been high on the agenda. So who better to discuss this with than one of the country's top economists, Stephen Moore. Stephen is the senior economist at FreedomWorks. He previously served as president of the Club for Growth, as chief economist of the Heritage Foundation, a member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and of course, as one of the top economic advisors to President Trump. So good to have you with us.
Good to be with you.
All right, well, Stephen, let's start off with the most recent development about the U.S. economy and a dire warning from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. She is saying that her department is going to have to take, and I quote, extraordinary measures if the lawmakers are unable to strike a deal to raise or extend the debt ceiling. How do you see this playing out?
Well, look, the Democrats can raise the debt ceiling if they want. They've massively borrowed and spent money, and there's no reason any Republican should vote for raising the debt ceiling when they're the ones who massively increase the debt. Now, I don't think that this is anything that investors should be nervous about. If the Democrats have the votes to raise the debt ceiling if they need to. And Republicans shouldn't stand in the way of that, but certainly not a single Republican should vote for it. They broke it, they have to fix it.
So you think Republicans should let them go ahead and raise it and let the chips fall as they may?
Look, there's going to be some, there's always a lot of kind of dealing and wheeling when we have these debts, because it's the one must-pass bill. So Republicans may, insist on things, but normally they would do that, except I don't see under any scenario where any single Republican would vote for this. So they don't really have much leverage because they're all going to vote no one way or the other.
All right. Well, I mean, it's certain that they will breach the August deadline, if you think about it, because Democrats are gridlocked on several pieces of legislation.
This is important because I've lived through this many times. So there are all sorts of, as you just mentioned, extraordinary measures that the Treasury Secretary can use to ensure that the United States does not default on its debt.
All right, but we're still seeing a lot of debt coming out of the country, any which way you slice it. And of course, that's leading to a lot of inflation concerns. Now we've got President Biden commenting on those inflation concerns. But here's what he has to say. He actually says that if your primary concern right now is inflation, you should be more enthusiastic about his spending plans. He thinks that it's actually going to work the other way around, that if you spend more, it's going to lower inflation. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think that's an economic absurdity, obviously. I don't think too many people actually would agree with that unless they have a political axe to grind. But obviously, we should be cutting our government spending now in Washington, not increasing it. The COVID crisis is over. I know some people are a little bit worried about the variant, but the truth is COVID is behind us. And so, in fact, there was something, the National Bureau of Economic Research just last week declared that the recession ended in April. Not April 2021, April 2020. So that means we've been in a 16 month expansion now. We don't need massive increased government spending. We should really be cutting it back. So I see no excuse, especially when you look at the what I think incredibly economically inefficient things that they want to spend money on. More welfare spending, more green energy subsidies. They want to mass transit, just really 19th century transportation modes that don't have much of a return.
You said the COVID pandemic is over. And then you mentioned the Delta variant, because some people are concerned that rightly or wrongly, it will be used as a reason to reimpose regulations, lockdowns.
We're seeing that right now. You're right. And I think it's unnecessary. Look, I want to make it clear, I'm an economist, not a health official, but I am looking at the data. The death rate is way, 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 way down. There are people getting the Delta variant, but they're getting much less sick than people used to. My only point is, you're right that I think one of the reasons the market has been so topsy-turvy lately is, you're right, there's a lot of jitters among investors that we might use Delta variant as an excuse to shut things down again.
Well, even if it doesn't happen in the US, you could see it happening in other countries, which are kind of leaning in that direction.
That's right.
Which would then slow down the global economy, which would affect the US, of course. Which brings me to the Fed, Because with rates where they are and the Fed having the monetary policy that it has at the moment, if there is another black swan event, be it the Delta variant or be it a black swan, something we're not expecting at all, what does the Fed do at this point?
Well, look, I think the Fed was too tight in the Trump years. We actually had a bit of disinflation in those years. Now I think, as we're seeing prices rise, it would be appropriate, I think, for the Fed to start, not in a major way, but pulling back on some of that money. Now, there's no way the Fed can do that, though, if the United States government borrows another $4 or $5 trillion. They're going to have to in some way monetize the debt, because we're not going to have a $4 or $5 trillion tax increase, and we're certainly not going to cut other government spending by $4 or $5 trillion. So there's only one other alternative, and that's to borrow and print money.
And that brings me to my next question, which is concern about the way the fiat currency is being managed, because ultimately that is where fiat currencies get their value from. And there is concern that the dollar is being debased by these policies on the international stage, and that sooner or later, and perhaps later, the dollar may lose its status as a global reserve currency. Is that a concern you share?
No.
No.
I don't see that happening anytime in my lifetime. Now, I think a much bigger threat to the supremacy of the dollar. Look, what are you going to buy? If you're not going to buy dollars, what are you going to do? You're going to buy the yuan? You're going to buy the yen? You're going to buy the euro? No, obviously not. I mean, I like to say that the dollar is the least rotten apple in the cart, right? So you're right that we've done a lot of things to debase our currency, but so have all these other countries as well. But I do think that a real threat and a welcome threat to the dollar is these cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin and so many others. I mean, I think this is here to stay. I think it's an incredibly positive thing, because I think it'll have a disciplining effect on these central bankers that feel like they run the world economy.
You don't think that they would move to outlaw, crack down, regulate cryptocurrencies,
I think
Bitcoin?
they will.
Let's talk about the U.S. quickly.
You mean
do you think that U.S. regulators are going to take a tougher stance on Bitcoin?
I do.
What would that look like?
Because they're terrified. What do government officials want? Control. They can't control these things like Bitcoin and other, I'm on the board of another crypto, which is called Frax. They don't want the competition. And that's exactly why, if you love freedom and liberty, you should be in favor of these kinds of alternative currencies.
So is it a smart investment if you foresee further regulation? If you foresee it as a threat to central banks and that they'll take action, would it make money to invest in it then?
It's a tough question, whether these things should be regulated. Let's take Bitcoin. I mean, think about what happened to Bitcoin. It went from 10 to 35, 40,000, right? I have a friend who was 18 years old. He bought $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, and now he's a multimillionaire. And so, but look, just in the last number of months, I mean, Bitcoin has gone from 60 to 40 or 35. I don't remember where it is exactly. So, what goes up can come down. And it's the Wild West out there with these currencies. I don't invest in things like Bitcoin because I don't understand how it works. I don't know what's behind it. And so, but look, my feeling is, if you want to buy it and you want to take that risk, why should the government tell you you can't do that?
But you do see it as a viable alternative to the reign of the dollar.
Yes. Well, look, I still think there's going to be a role for government fiat currencies. But I think when you've got a government like the United States that is spending and borrowing and regulating out of control, then it's natural that people are going to say, I don't want dollars. So what are they going to buy? Well, you could buy gold, but that's cumbersome. You're going to buy silver, you can buy commodities. But I think what's the saying? Bitcoin is the new gold. Bitcoin is sort of fulfilling the same function in some ways that gold did.
Well, what do you think of the concept of a central bank digital currency? Because we know the Fed is looking at a digital dollar. They're going to be coming out with a paper at the end of the summer. Fedcoin is a terrifying concept to many people because it's the ultimate in government control. If they know every single dollar in the system, where it's going, how it's being spent. Do you think that's going to happen?
I do.
You do?
I do. I don't know if it's coming next year or 5 years from now or 10 years, but the whole world is going digital. Everything's going digital. If you want to look at my wallet right now, you might find $3 or $4. I don't have to carry cash around. I've got my credit card. I've got plastic, that is all digital currencies. So yeah, I do think we're moving towards everything being digital, but you raise a really good point, and there is a real risk. That is, governments, are they going to track every transaction you make, where you go, what you spent your money on? That I think is, as a libertarian, I find that somewhat troubling. But again, if you're worried about that, let's say you've got a digital dollar and you don't want the government knowing how you're spending money. And by the way, just because you don't want the government knowing how you're spending your money doesn't mean you're a criminal. I get tired of people saying, oh, it's just drug dealers and, that kind of the mafia. No, there are very legitimate reasons where I, as an individual, I want my privacy from government. Well, that's where these other cryptocurrencies come into play. And that's exactly where they're going to compete with potentially these digital central bank currencies.
And that's exactly why central banks may move against them. All right, Stephen, unfortunately, we're out of time. I know you need it on stage for your next panel, but thank you so much for joining us here on Kitco News, Stephen. We'll really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Kitco News special coverage of Freedom Fest is brought to you by I Trust Capital.